as people who were employed by that are doing the stuff that they're doing, right? Those stories are out there on the web, but we don't have a way to bring them together, right? Because, the government's idea about it would be, well, we'll make the reporting stricter, right? We'll make it be that, every subcontractor and every employee and every person who touches, these streams of money, has to file paperwork with the central government, which of course can't work, right? Well, what's interesting to me is that if you actually go, and I did a little sample app that collected all this stuff, and it turns out that the contract numbers for each of these things are almost an unintentional unique namespace. Like if you search for the contract number for some random, if you look at your town and at the ARRA contracts that were given to your town, and you take that contract number and you search the web, the only page that you will find is the recovery.gov page that has the boilerplate, right? In other words, they've already minted a unique namespace, right? So if other people who want to associate stuff with that project, use that unique name. Wherever on the web they do, right? It could be a tweet. It could be a blog post. It could be anything, right? The web will find that stuff, right? The web has the ability to bring these things together, right? And so you could draw a context around everything that's been said in reference to the project if the things can be referenced. So the notion is that the obligation isn't so much to provide a central database, but it's to do the equivalent of what people do at conferences now, or at least at tech conferences, right? Where the first order of business is the tag for this conference is blah, right? And everybody knows that whether it goes on Twitter or whether it goes to the to Flickr or Blogstream or whatever, right? That you can assemble the context of everything that referred to that, but it flows from an intentional declaration of what is the namespace. Does that make sense?
Because kind of Kynetx talks about installing something in your browser or using some other endpoint to kind of identify your intent as you go into an activity.
Yeah.
But kind of what you're saying, so this is the way that Kynetx solves a context problem. But kind of what I'm gathering, kind of in aggregate, is that aggregation and search is never really going to go away.
Why would we want it to, right? We want these things. Yeah, we want these things to work hand in hand, right? Yeah, so, from a Kynetx perspective, right? If my issue is alternative energy, right? Then when I view my city's website and it has these hooks, right? Then the stuff that I want to assemble around those hooks is going to be conditioned on who I am and what I care to see, right? Even relative to that same, it could be the same agenda item, right? There could be different, conversations that attach to that based on where you're coming from. So you need both, right? But yeah.
Yeah, I think in my mind originally I was thinking of this grand vision of people just wanting to do something and the technology. I mean, in essence, Kynetx has to aggregate stuff too. From the data sources that they've kind of started to bring online from Microsoft to public data sources. And so I kind of saw a little bit of a drift away from the aggregation of search, but it doesn't make sense that it can work that way because you still have to collect all of that data. Kynetx does it, Google does it, Yahoo does it somewhere. But what I now am learning is a very important piece of the puzzle is identity. The ability to identify a specific piece of information and correlate that with other things. So you can then help people automate that context.
Yeah, that's a good point. So one of the things people were noticing about the Facebook announcements last week is that, suddenly all these objects have their own IDs online, right? So an event or a picture or a relationship, right? All of these things become first-class objects on the web, and they have identity, that is expressed as a unique URL, right? Well, guess what? Facebook isn't the only one that gets to do that, right? We can all do that, and it's trivial to do it. We just invent namespace. It's free and it's infinite. We just have to be conscious about using it.
John, when can we see a Jon Udell app written on the Kynetx server? Have you written an app yet?
Yeah, Hello World. Yeah.
Oh, I gotta get it.
Yeah. No. Well, so the one that I would do is this, right? So a project that I'm working on is community event information in a syndicated way, right? So I've got a whole service that's about syndicating and aggregating calendar information that's public. My big challenge is there's very little calendar information that is public in a machine-readable form, right? But to the extent that an interesting critical mass of such information can be developed, then the obvious Kynetx app, and I know that it already exists because I've been talking to people that have been, reaching into people's Google calendars from the client side, right? So that's the obvious one, right? Is that I've got my my private picnic, maybe it's in Facebook, maybe it's just in my own personal calendar, right? And I want to know how that lays, alongside of this public information. So that's kind of a slam dunk once I, solve the first problem, which is the hard one. Sure. Well, I mean, it should be a layup, right? I mean, if I had the information available in the forms that I need, it would be a layup, right? It wouldn't. I don't think. I mean, it'd be nothing to it, right? Yeah. In a machine-readable form? Yeah. Off of a private calendar. Yeah. I figure it's a one-liner, right? Yeah.
What I'm curious, you were talking about what stands in the way, what are some of the boundaries, and it leaps to mind that's the legal code. Like you said, in the situation of the council, now you have an archive, and there are rules around archiving information that are in not web code, but in the code of how they've conducted and grown to understand how they need to be responsible for that information set by rules. And
if they collect it, right?
But this is a whole new way of collecting it. They have a different way they've collected it up to this point, but now you're introducing an entirely new way. And the question is, well, how do we do that with? They don't lock in. I mean, the way they've been doing it, perhaps the long form, doesn't contemplate new, efficient, rapid collection.
And where the responsibility is decentralized and distributed.
Right. And it seems like you're talking about terms like that. It's a translation exercise. It's developing a new process and methodology. And I think I see that actually on a larger scale in some of what you're talking about, because it's kind of a convergence and a bit of there are a lot of, like you were saying, agents have to negotiate. These are the topics they're negotiating around, I think.
Yeah. I mean, what I really want is for individuals and organizations to all understand that they can and should be authoritative for the stuff that they are the authority for, right? So we put out the stuff that we know and that we assert and that we control, right? And then other people do too. And then we figure out how do we link the stuff up, right? How do we mash it, right?
But I think a technologist have an ability to understand authority differently than everybody else. I mean, you talk about the Facebook example. I think people are learning about authority, but then they'll read the agreements or the whole agreement battle. I mean, it ended so poorly. I mean, it was just we had this huge awareness, but the result was so poor. I mean, at the end, more legal agreements. That is what people. Those are the metering lights that people, that non-technology people or non-empowered people are going to think, well, should I? Will I be okay? Will something happen? And I think that we need to try to help educate around that you actually do have authority. And I think this is an education.
Well, I asked Phil about when he talks about this stuff to non-geeks, like what resonates, and he said the first thing is with AAA is that people get the idea of, okay, there's a discount and I could be missing it, right? So that works, right? That's a good way. Another way that I'm trying to talk to people about this is, if you really are authoritative for some piece of information, then you want the web to come to you for that information, right? You don't want to cede your control of it to some intermediary for the sole purpose of publishing it, because you can publish it yourself and the web will find it now.